Well, greetings, Pastor Eric here from my office, and I'm wanting to share with you some words about there's more to the story. More to the story. We're on the call of Samuel that we talked about yesterday. His mother Hannah, remember how she grieved for having a child? She would dedicate him to the Lord. Crying in the temple, Eli comes, Samuel is born, she dedicates him to God. Samuel spends time in the temple. God speaks to him. Finally, Samuel says, "Speak, Lord, for your servant is listening." Samuel, the transitory person between the judges and the kings, and then Saul, the first king. That's what we heard about yesterday. One of the things that struck me as we begin a new year, 2023, is the importance of avoiding bad examples. Saul was a bad example. He was the first king. All he thought about was himself. Saul only thought about himself. And as I was thinking about that, rather than going through some of the characteristics of Saul and some of his battles, I thought I'd begin 2023 with talking with you a little bit about humility, something that Saul lacked. So many of the people through the bad examples that we've seen in the Old Testament lack humility. They're concerned about themselves. They want the power, the control. They don't want to humble themselves and listen to God. And humility, sometimes we associate with humiliation, and we don't like humiliation. We don't like humility. But in a very real way, humility is not thinking less of yourself. Humility is thinking of yourself less, thinking about others. That's what the Old Testament, New Testament calls us to do again and again, to think less, to think of ourselves less, not to think of ourselves less, but to think, not to think less of ourselves, but to think of ourselves less. So a friend sent me a sermon a while back, but I didn't get where it was from, but I want to read some words about humility that he thought was very good in a sermon that he had heard, and it goes like this. Humility is not being a doormat and allowing people to walk all over you. Instead, it's an understanding that every human being is equally valuable, a recognition that you have no more worth or no less worth than anyone else. For many of us, humility is one of the hardest traits to develop because it starts from a recognition that we're not always right and that we don't always have the answers. I just think as we begin 2023, to begin it with a sense of humility. Humility breeds gratitude, thankfulness, all of that, to recognize our real place in the world, to go on, to try to cultivate humility. You may try one of these or more activities. Number one, spend time listening to others. A key quality of humility is to value others and enable them to be heard. Spending time listening to others, especially those who may think or believe differently than we do, and drawing out their feelings and values, enabling them to express themselves, is a powerful way to start. It's important to remember that you're not trying to solve their problems or answer them. Just listen and respond to them as a fellow human being. We've spent so much time alone, especially in the pandemic time. Hasn't been there so much a chance to be together and listen to others. That's why church now is so important. Coming to church, sitting with others in coffee time afterwards, coming to the women's group, men's group, all that kind of stuff, being with others, listening to them, helps cultivate a real sense of humility. Second, this is what Saul never did in our sermon, in the story. Never did this humility stuff. He was always concerned about himself and his power. Second thing, be accepting of yourself. An important element of humility is accepting yourself with all your faults rather than judging yourself for your shortcomings. That doesn't mean we shouldn't strive to improve, because we're called to do so as followers of Christ, but do this without berating yourself for your negative qualities. Third, be grateful for what you have. Take time to count your blessings. Take time this new year to count your blessings and be thankful for them. It's easy to get sucked into a negative spiral of wanting more, whether of yourself or materially. Take time to stop and remember what you have to be grateful for. That's a great way to cultivate a humbler and more positive frame of mind. Next, ask for help when you need it. There is, many of us will recognize, a form of pride that lies in being able to solve all our own problems. Humility, therefore, lies in recognizing when we need help and being able to ask for it appropriately. So many people that we've seen so far in the story have not done that. Next, seek feedback from others on a regular basis. This is particularly important for leaders, but we can all gain from hearing what others think of us. Take time to ask others to provide feedback and make it clear that you welcome their opinions. Listen to the feedback openly and then be grateful. Next, review your actions against the language of pride. Pride, arrogance, snobbery, and vanity are all unpleasant words. Sometimes it can be hard to avoid feeling a little bit proud of ourselves or vain. To cultivate humility, review your feelings against those words and ask yourself, was that prideful? Was I being a bit vain then? Am I being honest with myself? Recognizing and naming those feelings for what they are a good step toward humility. Next, finally, as we seek to live as humble followers of Jesus, remember the words of Saint Benedict. The first step of humility is unhesitating obedience, which comes naturally to those who follow Christ above all. Let me read that again. The first step of humility is unhesitating obedience, like we talked about in the sermon. To obey is better than sacrifice, which comes naturally to those who cherish Christ above all. Think about that as we begin this new year. How can we live our lives with more of a humble spirit, being grateful for all that God has done and all that God will do in the coming year? It's a good time to think about humility, a good time to think about gratitude, a good time to think about what this new year will hold for all of us. So, God bless you, and I look forward to continuing these conversations with you. You take care. Until I see you again, bye-bye.